When it comes to building a carbureted engine, the intake manifold is one of the most critical choices that you make. So today we're going to break down exactly how to pick the right manifold for your build and why your camshaft profile is the key to the whole equation. Let's go. This is a video I've wanted to make for quite some time, just getting around to doing it. Plus all the other videos I've done kind of compound on each other. We talked about how to pick the best size CFM carburetor. We've talked a little bit about camshaft stuff as far as how and why failures are occurring. That's a really good series. If you haven't watched that, I would encourage you to go do it. But this intake manifold seems to be one that, for whatever reason, it's like camshaft profiles. They're really easy to pick it on an emotional basis or what folks say on the internet. And a lot of times that can get you into a lot of trouble. So today we're going to talk about picking the right intake manifold for your application. We'll talk a little bit about cam profile. We'll talk a very little bit about cylinder heads, compression ratio, cubic inches, vehicle use, all the things that you need to know before you make a manifold selection. But why is the intake manifold such a critical choice when it comes to drivability, operation, all those things within a combination? Well, we'll talk about that extensively today. It's kind of frustrating sometimes because I get that all the time where people will ask me for a tuning recommendation on something, and I'll ask them what they're working on, and they'll give me the basics, and they picked the wrong cam profile. The intake manifold doesn't match what they're working on. And I know it can be frustrating because it's an expensive piece and you don't want to buy the wrong thing and then have to make a selection or a change down the road and spend your money all over again. What's the difference between the two? Well, a dual plane intake has two planes in it. See the runner and the divider here? One side feeds 4 cylinders on a V8 engine. This side feeds another 4 cylinders. So it is a dual plane intake. Longer runners, better torque, better velocity, better distribution of the fuel and air, gives it a little bit more time to kind of mix and meld together, dual plane style intake. Open plane, single plane intake is simply that. There is no divider in there. Fuel and air goes in, it spits out, goes directly into the plenum and down into the runners, feeding the engine. Very quick on the delivery, very fast, generally for more wide open throttle, high-end, higher RPM operation. More of a street intake, definitely more of a race type intake. Dual planes are fun because really in the last, I think 20 years, maybe a little longer than that, Edelbrock has really pushed the boundaries of intake manifold design, and that old performer style intake manifold that was a dual plane intake has changed quite a bit, where now they have the performer RPM that is still a very long runner, split divided dual plane intake, but has a little bit different runner design to hopefully get the fuel and air delivered a little bit quickly. And what that does is it changes the RPM level that intake manifold works in. The most important decision that you have to make before you select any intake is really start with what are you building? What is the vehicle going to be used for? What's the operating RPM range? Street engine, race car, whatever. That's your critical decision before you even make any other decisions here. I'm still a little old school, so forgive me for using a catalog, but I just tend to like to use that because of what it allows me to do very quickly. And probably you folks that are a little younger, they'll tend to look at this stuff more digitally than I do. It just makes it a little bit easier for me to take a look at it. So let's just take look at some common types of big block Chevy, street oriented type cam profiles, and we're going to take a look at the aspects of it and why we would use a certain manifold over the others. The first one that sticks out to me here is this 218-224. It's on a 510 lift, which really we'll talk about that in a second, on a 110 LSA. Now, what gives that the street attributes? The duration is the most important number. LSA is second, lift is absolutely dead last. Lift isn't irrelevant, but I would much rather know what the LSA and the duration is of a cam profile, because that will give us the characteristics of how that camshaft is going to respond and what the power range of it's going to be and what other things that we need to match up with it are. So that 218-224 would be a really fun, really still have some decent low-end torque, but really have some nice mid-range, great cruiser profile. 110 on the LSA will allow it to RPM a little bit, not too out of the too crazy. If it was on a 114, we could get this thing to RPM a little bit more. But Comp does a really nice thing here, and it tells you exactly what the power range is going to be, what the RPM operating range is. And on that camshaft, 1600 to 5400. Now the LSA is going to restrict that upper RPM range down a little bit. The duration has a little bit of effect on that as well. But really that 1600 to 5500 is really a nice cruising, drivable, torquey, fun camshaft on a street engine. Now, let's take a look at that. What does that mean on intake manifolds? So when we look at big block Chevy intake manifolds, let's take a look at the Performer RPM, and see which one is best for that. Now, I love the way Edelbrock has always laid their catalog out. It makes it very, very simple, very easy if you just take the time to take a look at. So let's take a look at a Performer series intake manifold. Now, this fits in for across the range of almost all of their intake manifolds in the Performer series. Almost all of them work from off idle to 5500 is the range that they talk about. Now, does that fit into our cam profile? Kinda, but is there something better? And that's where Edelbrock developed that Performer RPM. And this happens to be an air gap manifold, but it's still the Performer RPM series. And that one is really, really cool because that one has an operating RPM range of 1500 to 6500. Now, if you remember back to the camshaft we selected, it's 1600 to 5400, 5500. Fits in perfectly. Those match up really well. That intake manifold matches up extremely well with that cam selection that we made. And that's why defining the application is always the first thing that you're going to do. How do you want the vehicle to react? What RPM range do you want to operate in? Is it going to be primarily a cruiser? Or is it primarily a cruiser, but you like big smoky burnouts every now and then, and occasionally you might take it down the drag strip? Is it drag strip only? Is it in a big, heavy four-wheel drive where torque is your primary thing that you're after because you're turning big 37-inch tall tires and you want that good, grunty, low-end torque? Big block's a great place to start with that. And so all those things are important. You've got to define where your outcome's going to be. We call it backward planning. That's an old military term that I still tend to use, but it fits in very relevantly today. Where do you want to be? And then let's start planning backwards from here's what I want to be and here's all the things that I need to build to get there, to get to that final step. So that camshaft profile tells you where the engine wants to live. The intake manifold needs to match that world. Unfortunately, what I see very frequently over and over again is a really bad camshaft choice, and then that follows along with a really poor intake manifold choice. If we were going to run that duration of a 218, 224, 224, 230, 236, somewhere in there, but they're putting it in a stock 305, stock compression ratio, no cylinder head change, and they're going to put a big 750 carburetor on it, and yeah, it's just an absolute dog. They're horrible to tune. They don't drive very well. Really good at the upper RPM, but what's a 305 turn anyway? You're going to get 6,500 out of a stock 305, 8.5 one compression engine? No. So again, that's why I said it's best to try to figure out where you want to be and then backwards plan from there. And certainly if you're going to build a 305, 307, any sub 4-inch bore engine, you certainly are welcome to do that. I don't discourage that, but you're going to struggle along the way if you make really poor camshaft choices and certainly put the wrong intake and carburetor on it. Unfortunately, none of these parts are cheap, but one thing that I do see one mistake that they make over and over again is thinking that $150 intake manifold, this is a knockoff of the Performer or Performer 2.0 for a big block Chevy, and it's just catastrophically awful. There are certainly plenty of dyno results on there on what that intake manifold does. It's a knockoff. The people that knocked this off, that stole that design and decided that they were going to go out and try to copy it, don't have any clue how airflow goes, how that works in relationship to cylinder distribution and runner length and cylinder head profiles and camshaft profiles. All they did was take it, copy it, CMM it, and try to replicate it, throw it in a box, and call it the biggest, well, pile of garbage that they can get their hands on. It's really unfortunate that these are out in the marketplace, but it's something that you have to deal with. So if you make a poor choice here, or if you make a poor choice on a camshaft profile with a Summit knockoff camshaft, or some really cheap eBay, or God help you, an Amazon version of that, well, you're going to suffer for it. And unfortunately, it makes it really difficult to tune. Will it run? Yeah, they do. They do run. You can bolt this on there as long as it doesn't leak, and, well, the runners match up to the cylinder head, and if that's not completely awful, yeah, do they run? Yeah, but anything that's made in China that's a knockoff of a brand, well, you're going to be stuck with, unfortunately, dealing with the consequences. You'll leave a lot of power on the table, torque on the table, harder to tune, whatever the case may be. Don't make this decision. I get it. I understand things are expensive, but wait a little bit longer. Buy something that's a little better, certainly a little nicer, and your engine and the performance of it will thank you for it down the road. Cylinder head choice is certainly a big consideration also. I think people are pretty open to the fact that you can put too big of a carburetor on something and not have it run really well. We've done all those tests here, or done quite a few of them. I don't really like to do those, but people want to ask and people want to complain and argue about it, but the numbers don't lie. Putting too big of a carburetor on is certainly an option, and certainly they don't run very well. Unfortunately, cylinder heads follow that same path. You can put too big of a runner on an engine and not have it run well. Why is that? Well, runner design and runner length on the cylinder head and intake manifold really need to match up. The good news is in that, Edelbrock, I think AFR does it as well. Certainly the good American-made companies that are designing and building their own cylinder heads, Brodix, and in some cases Dart certainly follows that. But they'll generally outline their cylinder head in the same way. If the cylinder head and the intake manifold are both designed around that 1500 to 6500 like the Performer RPM is, they will have a Performer RPM cylinder head that matches up directly with that. Even if you decide to go down another route and you decide to run an AFR head on an Edelbrock intake manifold, no problem at all, as long as two things. One's the ports match up really well on the water and on the inlet for the fuel and air into the cylinder head, and as long as the RPM range and the runner volume of that cylinder head match up with it. We will go into that very, very deeply on a future video. I've already started shooting some of that content, but that's months down the road. But how to choose a cylinder head, it follows along the same lines. It's RPM and volume of the cylinder head and the intake manifold, and sometimes a smaller runner head makes better power on the street. It may restrict you on the upper end, but it's certainly a consideration to make. So choosing the right cylinder head absolutely fits into that equation. I think most people have probably heard that adage that it's not a single part that makes a horsepower engine on an engine, it's a combination of parts. Certainly these pieces, carburetor, intake manifold, cylinder head, and cam profile, are probably the leading things that you need to look at when you're trying to put a combination of pieces together. Yeah, there's a lot of other moving parts that go along with that, but those are the four primary ones that you've got to nail together. If you don't and you mismatch them, it's still going to run, but you're leaving an awful lot of power and torque on the table. So it's your responsibility to find where that harmony all lies between cylinder head, CFM, port volume on an intake runner shape and design, all those things, cubic inches of the engine, CFM on the carburetor. Now, thankfully, none of that is very complicated anymore. Like I said, those two catalogs over there that we just looked at are very helpful because it allows you, if you can just consider that, match up RPM range on intake manifold cylinder heads and cam profiles, you'll be in a much better shape than a majority of people that unfortunately have made a lot of bad choices over the years. That is the 950 VRS for the Chevelle. And the Super Victor 2, I don't know that I'm going to use that intake manifold. I kind of initially planned on it, but I think what I'm going to end up going with is a Performer RPM. Yeah, am I going to lose a little bit on the upper end? Yes, I will. Will I gain a lot of that back in the street drivability? Yes, and I think that's primarily what I'm going to use that vehicle for. But the Super Victor 2 is certainly there if I decide to get a little bit more aggressive and do more of a aggressive drag race type application. I'm not exactly sure yet. That's the beauty of it, but I've got all the pieces in case I need it. This is a really good example of what you can do and make bad choices or a choice that doesn't quite fit into what you're going to do. Now, obviously, that Victor manifold is a open plenum design. 3,500 to 8,500 is what Edelbrock advertises the RPM range to be. Is that engine, that 540 that I'm building, going to operate anywhere close to 8,500? No, absolutely not. It is going to be a hydraulic roller motor. If I was going to build a solid roller motor, then potentially, if I built everything else around it, I could get there. I certainly have the carburation for it. The cam profile would have to change, and it doesn't really fit into what I'm going to use it for on the street. However, I do plan on screwing around with it on the drag strip occasionally, and possibility of getting down that far. So yeah, does it match up what I want to do with really primarily what I want to do with it? No, and that's what would make that a bad choice for what I'm working on. Manifold, cylinder head, camshaft, carburetor selection, all of that really depends on other things as well too. So given that I'm going to build that 540 in more of a aggressive, not really race, but more aggressive street, maybe is the correct terminology to use. I don't know. I'm sure there's better words out there to describe it, but higher compression ratio certainly helps. More cubic inches certainly help those choices. So that Performer RPM intake that we were just looking at a minute ago, that Super Victor 2, they will certainly love a lot more compression on that intake manifold versus the Performer RPM. But will the Performer RPM still work? Yeah, it will still flow very well with a bigger compression engine. I think it's going to be probably a 12.5 to 1 compression ratio on that 540. I'm still in the process of kind of piecing all that together and making a cylinder head choice. This is about the 4th camshaft that I've had ground for it. I don't know if I'm going to use it. Whatever, it doesn't really matter at this point. But higher compression tolerates a bigger cam and manifold volume. Lower compression ratio in the engine prefers a dual plane or something with a little bit more velocity, like a dual plane or that Performer RPM intake, to give it the throttle response that you're looking for based on that backwards planning that we did of what your definition of what you want it to be when it's all grown up and done. Now let's work our way through some really general guidelines here. I don't want you to take this for gospel because every application is a little bit different and you need to be the determining factor in what you're working in. But let's give us some basic guidelines here. Street cruiser, you're going to prioritize drivability, throttle response, engine vacuum. You probably got power assist brakes. That would be more of a smaller carb, mild cam headers and a Performer style intake manifold. Should work all really well together. Off idle to 5,500. Remember, that's your primary thing that you need to think about. Dual plane manifolds, perfect for that. That cam profile, you're down around the 220 on the duration side, maybe a 110 on the LSA, 108, 106 if you want to sound really lumpy and have a good sound to it, but it's going to shorten up that power range, but it'll be very good on the lower end side of things. Street strip on a hybrid type of situation, you're looking for a little bit higher RPM, mid-range torque. If you're going to be that type of deal, cubic inches are going to increase a little bit. Maybe you're 350, 383 in that range if you're looking for, a cubic inch size. Compression ratio, 10 to 1 duration of the cam. Cam's going to be a little bit more aggressive than that basic cruiser, so maybe 218, 224 on the split. On the duration's pretty good. Again, that 110 LSA, 112 LSA seems to be very popular these days with the cam grinders. That would give you that mid-range RPM, and then you'd go with a Performer RPM style intake over the Performer. Now you're into that 1500 to 6500 on the RPM range versus the off-idle to 5500 on the Performer style intake. Drag racing, higher RPM, bigger cubic inches, higher compression ratio, certainly a more aggressive cam profile like we just talked about a little while ago. Upper RPM power range where you're at maybe that 3500 to 8500 that this one's in. That's kind of where you're going to be at, but you need all the other things to support that. If you're an automatic, obviously the converter needs a matched cam, fuel system needs full bit, gears on the back side of things, on the differential, certainly you're probably going to be a drag race application, so you don't really care generally about an overdrive, unless you're a drag and drive type of deal, then certainly that's important. But that Victor Jr. or Super Victor intake manifold is perfect for that type of applications. Again, just talking about general pieces and parts here. I don't want to give you a recipe and then you go out and recreate it and go, hey, this really sucks in my four-wheel drive pickup with the 34s or 33s or 37s or 44s on the thing. Yeah, it would be a dog. Some of the most fun applications to tune are a mid to smaller cubic inch, four-wheel drive, off-road, mall crawler, cruiser, whatever, it doesn't matter. I love tuning on the Performer RPM, that off-idle to 5500, certainly a smaller carburation size, 500 to 600 CFM, 302 to 351 Windsor, love those combinations. Really, really fun to dial in, but they're certainly along the same ways. Lower RPM, torque, tight or smaller LSA cams, that 110 and lower, very mild cam profiles, higher velocity on the airflow side, on the intake manifold, and on the cylinder head side. Fun cruisers, drivers, but certainly have a much more milder application as far as all the pieces and parts go together. That Performer manifold's been the tried and true for decades. People have tried to copy them. Nothing really beats them. They are one of the best intake manifold choices for that style of application. So let's summarize this whole situation. Define your goal, what you're going to do. Street, strip, torque, four-wheel drive. What are you going to use the application for? Backwards plan from there. Choose your camshaft profile to go along with that based on that desired power range and power curve and RPM that you're looking for. Match the cylinder heads to support that airflow range and that RPM range. Select the intake manifold that fits all of those things combined together. RPM range, the velocity of the air going through there, what your power range, what your desired camshaft profile all fits in together. Pick all those things accordingly. Size the carburetor to fit all those things. Putting the right carburetor or putting the right intake manifold, cylinder head, and cam profile, but putting a 1050 Dominator on it on a street application that's looking for torque really doesn't fit in. All of the things combined in together. And like gurus have said for decades, matching the parts up completely is what really pulls all the things together and gives you the drivability that you're looking for, the power you're looking for. Mismatching things gives you that sluggish, awful, boggy, can't get out of its own way situation when you mismatch them up and get it wrong. Common mistakes people make is just mismatching parts. Choosing something based on an emotional situation. Man, I really want to run a tunnel ram or a dual four setup, and not thinking about the drivability side of things and the tunability side and all of the things that you're going to have to do to really work to make that combination work. I get it. I understand it. I've had 2.4 setups. I will never run another one again. They just don't make that good of power. Sure, they look good. Yeah, they look awesome and smart and cool and all that, but they're really a pain in the backside to tune. And unless you're building a period correct gasser or you just like the look of a 2.4 setup underneath hood, I get it, I understand it, but making emotional decisions based on purely emotions and not on what you're actually looking for, Yeah, that tends to be a mistake from time to time. Ignoring what you want out of drivability and vacuum signal, big things to consider. Now, certainly I understand, running a bigger, lumpier camshaft profile sounds really good, but if you're going to run vacuum brakes, you're making a poor choice. Switch over to Hydro Boost or eliminate it and go to a manual brake setup. Just understand that your decisions have consequences, and sometimes you're just not in the right position to make those if you're, want that, cruiser or that car show cam profile or whatever the case may be. Yeah, it may sound good, but may not give you exactly what you want on the drivability side. So if you've got a build that you're working on and you'd like a little, perspective on does a combination work, drop those comments down in the links. I love looking at those prior to you making that decision. I hate looking at it when you've already made it and you're trying to figure out carb tuning or why, it's got a really nasty hesitation or you can't get the ignition timing right in it or any of those things. I really hate to see that after the fact that's already been made. So if you're building something you want to talk about, leave those comments down below. If you got any questions on the video, or if you think I left anything out, didn't talk about anything enough, leave those in the comments. Love to discuss that with you. And hopefully you can build the setup you want to build. But yeah, that backwards planning side of things, man, I love doing that. Makes all the difference in the world. So hopefully you pick out the right manifold for your situation and keep cruising down the road, building torque, horsepower, RPM, whatever it is you're trying to do. And we'll talk to you on the next one. We'll see you.